Welcome to the untitled podcast that is geeking or something. We have no idea what this show is going to be called.
We're figuring it out as we go along.
Exactly. We recorded in episode 1 or episode 0. It's an episode dead because my mic was just so low. Maybe some arcane science could recover that audio, still have the file, but it's probably not going to hear the light of day. So we're going to kind of go over it again, but because we're human, we aren't going to completely repeat exactly what we did before, because that was 2-ish weeks ago, and I can't remember that far back that with that detail. Anyway, I'm David Moore. I am a lapsed podcaster from the Game Master Show, After Serenity, The Signal. Really wanted to get back into podcasting again, and the current situation, COVID-19, made that a lot easier. So maybe silver lining. I also, friend of mine, game designer Jerry Grayson, we do a video cast called Cowboy Dracula on YouTube. And so go ahead and check that out. But I am here with my co-host, co-producer, and
partner in crime,
fellow
mad scientist.
Yep.
Fellow geek parent. So I'm Ken Newquist, and I am also a lapsed podcaster, perhaps slightly less lapsed, as though I have managed to eke out a podcast once a year for the last several years on my website, nuketown.com. I enjoy all manner of geeky things, including tabletop games and board games and stuff related to that, and other stuff that we're going to be talking about on this podcast once we start segueing, which is not so geeky stuff like backpacking and camping and running, which, as we talked about in our previous episode, -1, is not a thing I ever thought I would have said 20 years ago, but, we grow over time, right? So talking about the great outdoors, Hexcrawl?
Which is we had talked in that earlier episode about like the fact that I had no idea what a hexcrawl was up until a month or so ago, and evidently it's been a thing for over 3 years, 2-3 years at least, and yet I am just now hearing about it, which also makes sense because I moved about 2 years ago and hadn't been as into gaming as I have been. Especially like keeping up with it over the last few years, just because of life. So I decided to give it a try because it sounded cool, and I have always loved the Gamma World as a setting and such. And so with 3 friends, I ran our first session of Gamma World. I decided to use 2nd edition, which is only marginally. It has a little bit more than 1st edition. I have every edition up through 4th, I believe it is, which is the D20 edition that came out via White Wolf, which has some cool ideas, but didn't feel like Gamma World to me.
I agree.
Whereas 2nd edition is, oh my gosh, that thing is so gonzo.
Yes, it is. I've been reading up on it since you mentioned it. It's
basically totally random in terms of what you get. There is no balance at all in between characters. It has come a long time since 1983. Let me just put it that way.
Yes,
so it is. Well, let me just give you an example. We have 3 characters. 1 character is a pure strain human, and we have 2 mutated characters, 1 human, 1 animal. The mutated human, when you're rolling for mutations, you get to add in your constitution, I believe it is, onto your percentile roll for physical mutations. And the higher you get, the better. The lower you get, the more of a chance for a defect you get. And he rolled. Oh, and you roll 2d4, 1d4 for mental, 1d4 for physical. And he got 4s for both. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be such an OP character. And then he starts rolling. He ends up getting 2 physical defects out of his 4 physicals. But he also rolled over, because of the bonus, over 100, which allowed him to choose 2 physical mutations. So he had like 5 physicals and 4 mental. And so he got like death field generation and or no, sorry. He wasn't the one that got death field generation. He got life leech, which allows him basically to be a vampire in an area of effect around him. And a bunch of other mutation stuff. And he was pretty good. He rolled kind of low on hit points, about like 29-ish or something, which is really low in that edition of Game World, because what you do is you take your Constitution score and you roll that many d6, and that's your hit points. Pure Strain humans get... so when you're rolling up characters, you normally roll 4 dice 6 and you drop the lowest, unless you're Pure Strain human. For Pure Strain human, for their Constitution and 2 other stats, they get to keep that 4th die 6. So they have a lot of hit points, or should. So this other player rolls and is writing all the numbers down, and it's like, I think this character may be a bad character. It's like, why do you say that? I have a 4 Constitution. He rolled 4 die 6 and got 4 1s, and has, I believe, a total of something like 17 or 19 hit points total. And this is a case where normally you'd have like 40 or 50 hit points.
Right.
And they don't go up when you level, really. And then later on in that game, a friend of mine finally was able to join, and he also rolled Gonzo on his mutations, but he also rolled really well and has like on his hit points, and he's got up near 90 hit points. Like, he's got more than both of the other characters combined.
Nice.
So we've been running through Albuquerque Starport, which is the module that's in like the GM screen that came with the games. I'm actually running the first edition version of that. There really isn't any difference between those two. But I keep having to remember not to use what's in the book, but to cut it by at least a third, because the recommended character size, and this is another thing that's changed over the years, is it says recommended for 4 to 8 players with a recommended of 6. Wow. And like now it's like 4 is kind of the default.
Right.
And so here I am, like there's these 3 giant mutated sand shark things, and I'm like, wait a minute, there should be 1 mutated sand shark thing, and I should probably lower its hit points. Yeah, I should probably lower its hit points a little, and yeah, because otherwise they're just gonna die like right off the bat. But what I want to do is I kind of want to add some house rule stuff in there where, and actually I have a packet of it. I had picked up, what is it called? It's the itch.io is currently running a bundle for Black Lives Matter and a bunch of other civic-minded charities, and like the Bail Project and such. And so it's like $5 or whatever you want to pay. I paid $10. And right now, I think the number is 1,700 games of various kinds. Most of them are computer games, but some are not. And I found this thing called Ex Novo. Have yet to play around with it, but the idea is you get around with 4 people, up to 4 people, and you make a settlement. And basically that's like the session of a game, and you kind of get the history of that settlement, how it grew, problems it might have, and then when you're done, you can use that for like a novel, or in this case, Game World. So because they come from a settlement, and then the idea will be, when they go out on this Hexcrawl and come back, the idea is to help their settlement grow, survive, thrive, etc. And so I'm going to try and add some mechanics in for that side as well, not just murder hobos kicking down the door and taking all the gold.
Right. So have you gotten to the drawing out your hex map portion of the Hexcrawl, or are you still at the There's still
no? I actually have not. So I mean, we I wanted to run a game, and so basically they were lost in a sandstorm near Albuquerque, New Mexico, what they call the Kirky, and saw basically the ruins, or what they thought was like an ancient's building, like a hut. And it turns out that it's basically, with all the drifting sand, it was the top of it's a spaceport. It's the starport, the control tower. And so they went in through one of the broken windows, and then they spiraled down, had a fight, nearly killed them because that's how they rolled their characters. And then spiraled down into this building that's all covered with sand. And now they're exploring that building. And then what I figure is, what I showed the Ex Novo thing to them this last weekend when I was over at one of their houses. They were like, yes, let's do this to make the settlement. And so I figure we'll make the settlement, and I'll make up the hex map as well before our next session. So
very cool.
Yeah.
As was mentioned in the Lost episode, I was also running. I'm also running a hex crawl. Mine is more science fantasy, so I'm skewing a little bit towards Greyhawk with expedition to the Barrier Peaks thrown in, and other kind of sciencey weirdness. So there's definitely going to be some mutations running around, and I think there's a little bit of kind of Spelljammer in there. So the weirdness is coming more from the monsters. So I'm relying heavily on Kobold Press's Tome of Beasts, and I think it's Creature Collection.
Mm-hmm.
Creature Collection. That book's downstairs right now. I have a big stack of books as I'm working on the hex crawl. And so this is my lunchtime game. So it's been cool because they have actually headed out from their original world. And so we're very much taking sort of it's a D&D 5th edition game, but we're very much borrowing from the story game mindset of just kind of building the world as we go along. And so when somebody asks a question about, what's this world like? I say, I don't know. What do you think it's like? Right. So this has then given rise to one of the characters. He decided he wanted to be a lizard folk. Okay, let's talk about lizard folk. What's the deal? Okay, well, actually, this whole area used to be ruled by some sort of reptilian civilization thousands of years ago. So now a lot of the relics we're going to find, well, those are all left over from the ancients. So you've got Dragonborn and dragons and what have you. And,
very cool.
And various mutations running around. And so the book that I've ordered but have not received yet, which kind of seems to be the perfect book for this campaign, is Arcana of the Ancients by Monty Cook Games.
Okay.
And so they've got mutations, they've got ciphers and kind of Numenera. So, their big thing was the Numenera science fantasy setting, which takes place like a billion years in the future.
Got it.
And so it's giving me the possibility of mutations, but for 5th edition. So I'm eagerly awaiting it. But we're in the COVID-19 era, so it takes a while for books to order. Like, the days when you would order the book and it shows up tomorrow, or well, they're not with us right now.
They're not with us right now. Yep.
So I'm very much looking forward to cracking that book open and starting to throw some weirder stuff at the party.
That's cool. Yeah, so you're using 5th ed. I was going to ask, but you answered my question before I asked it.
Yes.
How did you make the hex map? Did you use any process, or did you put stuff down?
So, it's funny. I spent a lot of time searching for a process because I think I was kind of paralysis by analysis, sort of like it's this big, open, kind of scary hex, right?
You have an empty sheet of paper,
nothing but hex paper.
Yeah,
and you got to start drawing something, right? And so it's like, well, how do I come up with something that kind of makes sense? And then at one point I just realized, and after spending far too much time reading about other people's hex crawls, I came to the conclusion, and some people have like very complicated, very detailed systems of like, okay, here's a desert hex. Now roll on these 3 tables to generate, all of the surrounding hexes and the microclimate and the different things that live in those areas, which 20-year-old me would have been totally down with. But 40-something me does not have that kind of time. So I just sat down and started drawing, right? So nice. I just okay, I know it's going to be called the Serpent Hills. All right, so if there's hills, maybe there's mountains. Okay, there's the Shield Mountains that are to the west. What's to the east? Well, I want to have a crashed starship. There's a crashed starship out there.
Nice.
And so it's just kind of, once I kind of gave myself permission to just start drawing, and not being super concerned about the climate. Like I think like most gamers, or at least most game masters, I've spent a fair amount of time reading about world creation and thinking through like the actual physics and world building of, okay, if you have mountains and there is an ocean nearby, then when the water vapor hits the ocean, the water is going to hit the mountains and run back down to the ocean, and it's going to be drier
on the other side. Right.
And so try not to have totally ridiculous maps, but at the same time, okay, it's like a Gamma World science fantasy knockoff.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean,
if there's a microclimate that I want, I'm just going to throw it there.
Yeah, and then the idea can be, well, why is it here? Why is it snowing in the middle of this rainforest? Well, there's a whole reason for adventures to find out why.
Exactly.
And then you don't have to figure it out now.
Right. And I think one of the things that I've certainly learned, and I'm certainly not the first person to have mentioned or noted this, if you as the DM just kind of throw it out there, more often than not, the players will start speculating and they'll come up with the answers for you.
Yep.
Just tip your hand.
Some of my best games, like the best game that I have been told I have ever run was a White Wolf Vampire the Masquerade game, and I ran it very differently. I had everybody make their own themselves as humans, and then they were changed during the course of their preludes. I also said, don't worry about the points in the book, just read the dots and rate yourself. So like according to the strict vampire rules, they would have been uber monsters because, most college students can lift, up to 3 dots. It's not that hard if you're, a 20 something to lift 120 pounds or something like that. Yes, most of the players could drive a stick shift. Okay, well that's 3 dots. It very rapidly you would have run out of points. Several of them were, I'm going to master's degree. Well, okay, that's a bunch of dots there. That sort of thing. But
man, I never knew I was so overpowered in real life.
yeah, you are. And what was funny though is like a lot of the times I would be quiet, and they would talk amongst themselves, and they would come up with their own conspiracy theories, and I'd just listen. And some of those I would make happen. I would do the same thing with the D&D games that I would run. The one campaign world that I had made. Each game that previous players or even the same group had played would add to the history of the world, and the next group would be in that same sort of history. But the same sort of thing, like if there's a mystery, a lot of times I would leave it sort of open-ended and they would figure it out. Or, if they're trying to figure out how to track down the big bad, I hear all their plans and I take note of which ones will probably work, which ones won't. And hey, that one sounds really interesting. That sort of thing. Yeah. So yeah, listening as a GM, developing your listening skills as a GM, really, really helps plan for adventures.
Indeed. As opposed to the way I used to do it, which was allow me to sit down and spend 8 hours writing this book.
Right.
Of which I will run 10% of it.
Right.
Which again is things you can do before you have kids.
Yes. And that was one of the reasons why I never really ran modules, but I would read modules, just to get ideas and stuff like that. There are a couple of modules that I really liked. I'm finally running the Albuquerque Starport, but I've pulled ideas from that more than a few games in different genres. So, which is funny because it's a really small module, but at the time I read it, it was very influential. So that's it for my Hexcrawl stuff. How is your Hexcrawl going? I should ask.
I think it's going pretty well. So unfortunately, my real world schedule, because we run this at work, so it's with a group of friends and colleagues from the day job. And so I've been running a lunchtime game in some variety or another for like the last decade, I guess, which is kind of shocking when I actually sit down and think about it. But it's been going pretty well. We had originally we had been running our lunchtime game had been a GURPS Fast and Furious style game, where we're basically using GURPS Lite, not paying too much attention to the real world physics, and just kind of making it up as we go along. And it's not so much the rule of cool so much as it is like the rule of the Fast and the Furious, right? So sometimes as gamers, I think we all have this tendency to kind of fall into, but is that how it would really work? Mm-hmm. And the answer in the Fast and the Furious game is, who cares? How would it work in a Fast and the Furious movie, right? Like, so of course you can like jump a tank over 30 cars. That's what you do in a Fast and the Furious movie. Who cares if it actually worked that way?
Right.
If you can jump a car between buildings, you can make a tank fly. Come on.
Yeah. Yep.
But so then the person who's running that's been on vacation for a while. He took an extended vacation, so I stepped in to run this Hexcrawl, and it's been pretty cool. They've been venturing out into the world, and it has been going more or less the way I had hoped it to. So me as a DM, one of my goals was to take a step back and to, as we've just been saying, let the players plant the seeds and not spend time over planning and jotting things down and like just keeping the bare minimum of notes I need to be able to carry things forward to the next session and not sweat the small stuff. And so I think it's been going really well. It's been the stress relief we need. So prior to COVID, we had been gaming once a week on Thursdays, which, that means that basically you've got like the equivalent of 1 4-hour session stretched out over the course of a month.
Mm-hmm.
Because you did era, we've been meeting
because that was your lunchtime game, right? That was your lunch game, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we would, given all the things we would normally have to do, we would just meet once a week on Thursdays and call it good. In the COVID era, just for, because we've all been social distancing for so long and we were all, quite frankly, going a little stir crazy, we decided to make it 2 sessions a week, sometimes 3, depends on availability. But It's been going really well. I think it's fun. I actually need to sit down and draw more of the map.
That's a good problem to have, probably.
It's a very good problem to have. And it's fun to actually sit down and draw. I have Hexographer, which is a mapping tool where you can sit down and actually just kind of draw it out using a computer program. But it is very, very relaxing to just sit down with actual pen and paper and write it out.
Cool. Yeah, if Hexographer is any good, let me know or send me a link to it, because I'm looking for things that are good for doing hex maps. I could do it with like Illustrator or printing out some hex paper, but I also need to share it, and share is much easier. Like I had to take a photo of the map of the starport, and then I'm slowly revealing it using Photoshop. But because of the way I had to take a picture of it, like the left-hand side is mostly, the squares are mostly square, but then on the right-hand side, everything's kind of, kind of like the page was curled a little bit or something when I took the photo.
Gotcha.
And so like the right-hand side is kind of squished. It's definitely not squares anymore.
So the thing I'm trying that was suggested in some of the reading I had done for Hexcrawls, see our earlier comments about spending way too much time researching Hexcrawls, and I chose to not reveal the map. So yeah. I'm just describing the map to them and in broad terms what they see. So the Shield Mountains are to the west. There's this crater to the east. You're in a bunch of hills that limits your vision of the horizon. And so it's been interesting because like they made a knowledge check last time. Like they were talking, they were trying to figure out. They're basically trying to find these lost caverns because they're looking for the fabled Black Lotus for reasons. And
is it going to be a magic card?
Is it going to be a what?
A magic card?
No, but that might be one of my illustrations. And so most of these characters they've determined they're not from the region, so this is all new to them. So they rolled knowledge checks to see what they know about the region, and it turns out they know nothing about what lies to the south. So they have no context for the region that they're actually in. The one guy who grew up here, who is the lizard folk, he's a librarian who grew up in the Scales of Truth, which is this town ruled by a dragon that's been hoarding knowledge instead of gold, right?
Scales of Truth. That's a interesting play on words there. So. Yeah,
I liked it. It struck me. It's one of those things that struck me at 2 a.m. I know what I'm going to name my campaign, right? Nice. So it's fascinating to have a hex crawl where nobody knows anything. right? I, as the DM, have some idea what lies to the south,
Mhm.
but I'm just kind of playing with it
And
as
you
we
can
go. So
kind
it's
of
fun.
fog of war as they go out, you're slowly filling in the map for them.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like to the south there is Iron Crown, which is a dwarven settlement built in a
Mhm.
crater where an iron meteorite hit. I don't know
Nice.
much more about that. They send patrols out, so that's a random encounter. I know there's a place called Skull Keep, and I know that it's kind of like it's got a very Mad Max's feel to it, including was it Immortal Joe from the
Immortan Joe.
the latest.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I envision him as kind of like the ruler of the keep, only not quite so much. And so I have these ideas of what lies down there, but I'm really only going to detail it when they get to it, which is part of that discipline as a DM. Because I have a tendency to, in ye olden days, I had a tendency to overplan.
Got it.
So yeah, I think once they've had some time where they've been out in the world and they themselves have a better sense for where things lie, then I'm going to actually map it out in Hexographer, and it'll become more relevant. Like now you know this region more, right? So
Yep.
you have a mental picture, and then that's how it maps to the map. But until they maybe they can fly or they get to the top of a mountain or something, I don't think I'm going to show them the map.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that idea. I think what I'm going to end up doing is similar to what I've done in other campaigns, where like if I do know there's like that Iron Keep sort of location, kind of determine like who they are, what their goals are,
Right.
and that'll kind of determine like when they'll meet them and like what the disposition is when they'll meet them. But like the super fine details, I don't even bother until they've gotten there, and that I think that'll work pretty well for this particular hex crawl as well. So, but I've got a wide open canvas because the fact that, and I didn't realize this when I was a kid until I read a particular Dragon magazine that talked about like Gamma World on the moon. But now looking back on it, the first ever Gamma World module was a starport. So it wasn't an airport. It wasn't a let's go around the world. It was let's go throughout the solar system. And then all of that collapsed. So like this hex crawl could span the solar system or beyond and still be Gamma World.
So I will say the other thing that I found interesting when you're talking about scale is how much you can pack into a region.
Yeah.
Right. And so and it's more than you think. And so the comparison that a lot of people make is to Skyrim. Skyrim's a fairly well-known video game that a lot of people have played. And the playable area within Skyrim is 14.3 square miles.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. If you look on a map of today's world, 14.3 square miles can encompass a heck of a lot. I like going across town. There's a lot of places even near my house that I would be surprised and have never seen yet.
Right.
So yeah, Hexcrawl can be definitely a very tiny area and yet be still jam-packed with lots of different and diverse things.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that I found, I was trying to get my head around is like the scale of it kind of defeats you because we drive everywhere, right? And so, driving 14 miles, that takes you 15 minutes.
Yeah. If,
right?
if you're on the expressway, it's definitely 15 minutes. If it's
on
a side road, it's maybe a half an hour. But if you're walking that's like all day.
Right. And if you're hiking it, and like, if you're not on an actual trail and you're just kind of like bushwhacking through the underbrush and you're carrying a big pack of gear, suddenly and so trying to get that modern mindset and put it into this sprawling wild, I've been trying to rein myself in there too, to give a sense of like, okay, well it's pretty big, but not as big as you think. It doesn't have to be 1,000 square miles for it to be full of stuff. I think that's the lesson I've learned through Hexcrawls. Yeah,
I don't need to map out all of a continent. Yeah, like since I'm using the Albuquerque starport, and it's in the Kirky region, I can map out a portion of that. And if the players say, "Hey, we want to roam farther," that's fine. I can map out a portion there, or and maybe use some ancient transportation to get them there quickly. But there's still plenty of I don't know that they will actually want to do that, because there should be plenty of interesting things that I can kind of fit into a smaller area as well.
Right.
With the occasional trip outside and then back. So.
Right. And so I think part of my ground game for my Hexcrawl has been, I've been doing a training program for running a 10K. Mm-hmm. And so I've run a 5K before, which seemed, when I first started running, 5K seemed impossible.
It seems impossible to me, and I would love it if you would be my, if you would help me with moral support to get me to 5K.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it was painful all the way. It was hard. I think having I think we've talked about before, but not with a studio audience. Running a 5K is one of those things that as you're doing it, having a training program is helpful. Having explaining to you, this is your rest day, you're doing intervals, so you don't just go out one day and decide you're going to run 3.2 miles, which is what a 5K is, or approximately.
Right.
You need to work up to that, or else you'll just drop dead.
Right.
Which was, what I tried to do. The first time, I'm bad at running. No, I'm not bad at running. It's nothing else, and maybe very few things in your life. Do you ever just walk out the front door and say, I'm going to be an expert at this?
Yep. Even
I can go run 5 miles.
Even when you have done training, if you do it wrong, it's still bad. For instance, in high school, I used to do cross country when I was in junior high, and then I was living overseas in Malaysia, and they're like, hey, we need people for the track team, because it was a small school. And I was like, you're asking me to be on the track team? Okay. And so I did join the track team, but there was a friend of mine, he ran the 1600 meter, and even during training would run it really fast. In fact, the coaches would say, hey, pace yourself. Well, we finally got to an actual meet, our one meet with other schools.
Right.
And he sprinted it. And he only made it 3/4 of the way before he went down on his knees and threw up on the side of the track because he just pushed his body too far.
Exactly.
It was just too much for his body. So yeah, I understand from that aspect, pushing yourself too much, too quick.
Yeah. So having learned my lessons of the 5K, I've now got a 10K training program that I got from Runner's World, and it's set out over 8 weeks, and so it is what is the sane way of doing this, which is, okay, you run for 2 miles on one day, and then you have intervals training where you run 400 meters. Was it 400 meters, rest for 2 minutes, run another 400 meters. You do 400 meters 4 times with breaks in between, and then you run another 2 miles. And I mean, I've been feeling pretty good about running, and I thought I didn't think it was going to be as hard as it was. It was completely humbling, because I've been jogging, but I haven't been sprinting. And so to jog for 2 miles and then to try and sprint for 400 meters, I didn't even know how long 400 meters was.
Yeah,
longer than I would have liked.
Yes, it's almost half of a kilometer.
Yes,
but yeah, if sprinting actual full out all sprint for 400, that's rough. From my days in cross country, the thing that I remember being really rough from running was the rest. You'd run, and then if you were for cross country, it was a long distance thing, and I learned early on in training, doesn't matter if you're winded, do not slow to a walk, because getting your butt started to run again is so much harder. Just keep the whatever pace you had and just finish it. Don't try and slow down to rest and then try and start running again, because it just feels worse.
Yeah, so I actually have, to bring it back to a geeky topic. So in my running, and I started running just because I needed an exercise to just kind of get fitter as a geek dad. We have so much stuff that we're doing with the kids all the time. I just needed an exercise where I could just go out my door and do it. So that was my motivation to do it originally. And when I've really started doing this training program and getting to the point where I was actually capable of running a 5K or getting close to it, my visualization was from Nine Princes in Amber. Have you read Nine Princes in Amber?
Oh, yeah. They're up on that shelf somewhere.
when Corwin is walking the pattern, that's my motivation, because
got it.
In the book, Corwin
pushing past the resistance
needs to walk this magical pattern, and to complete the pattern and prove one of the blood, you have to pass through these different shrouds, these different barriers along the way. And the key is you have to keep moving. If you stop, you die, if I remember correctly. Right. And so you have to push your way through each of these shrouds. And so when I'm running and I hit that wall, it's like, okay, that's the first shroud. Need to it doesn't matter how slow you go, you just need to keep going.
Keep moving.
So that's my visualization. I can feel the flames rising up around my feet, and the resistance growing, and then you push through it and get on to the next one. So.
Yep. Definitely don't sit down.
Definitely do not sit down.
You will just that'll be the end of your run. So.
Right. Exactly. You might as well just stop. So.
Right. We also wanted to talk about, well, our general topic that we did talk about, we can re-talk about, although you said you might have some different games this time around, was like...
I have one.
3 new RPGs we'd like to play. Yeah, we could probably both take one off, because since we recorded, but we can still talk about it if you want, since we recorded, we have both played in the same game, Tales from the Loop, which I hope you're enjoying, because I'm running it. I hope you're actually enjoying it.
I am definitely very much enjoying it. It is a fantastic nostalgia trip.
It is a pretty cool nostalgia trip. It is a very different game to run from what I've, one, being out of kind of practice GMing, but 2, it is a narrative game. Like, I don't roll any dice as the GM. It's all up to the kids, the players. And so our game is set in 1983, which coincidentally, now that I recall, is the start of Gam World. Maybe you guys could have a game of that new game, Gam World, at some point.
Game within a game. We're going meta.
Yep. And then and they're out in, trying to remember, it's not Nevada, or is it Nevada? They're in the U.S.
Boulder City, Nevada, right?
Boulder City, yeah.
Boulder City. It's not New Mexico, right?
I don't think it's New Mexico. It doesn't really matter. But it's a fictional city. But you guys are out investigating things, remembering what being a latchkey kid back in the 80s was, because parents weren't there. They were working. Back in the 80s was really when the full 2-paycheck marriage sort of thing really was a thing. Now it's normal. Right. But back then it was, how do we do this? Well, I guess the kids will kind of take care of themselves. Oh, they did. They didn't die. That's great. In fact, just a couple weeks ago when I talked to my parents, I was like, yeah, I drive all the way over to Porter County, blah, 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 from where we lived. And my dad looked at me and was like, you did? It's like, yeah, I had a bike. I mean, the pool, I went to my friend who is a mile away, on my bike, go to the pool, which is about a mile away. Porter County was only about 4 or 5 miles away. Might as well go there. I went even further than that a couple of times, but basically the idea was, hey, come home before it's dark and or before dinner.
Right.
And days before cell phones, it was just like, that's the way it was. And so that's very much kind of the vibe I'm trying to bring to Tales from the Loop, in addition to the weird super science mystery that you guys are investigating.
I think the challenge, I'm really enjoying it. I think it was on my list for the last time we were talking about this, because I love this time period, and I love just kind of like evoking those sorts of things. And the original source book is actually set in Sweden, which is where half of my family is from. So it just seemed like I had to buy a role-playing game that was set in Sweden, because I don't know that there's any others. The thing that I found interesting, as we've done 2 full sessions at this point, right?
Yep.
Is trying to get our kid logic figured out, right? Because when we're confronting the problems, we're trying to think about what we would do as kids, not what we would do as gamers, and not what we would do as adults, and not what we do as kids today.
Right.
Right. So,
right.
because kids in the 80s, you just go kind of charging off after that. Like, the responsible thing to do is maybe go tell the authorities or find the principal or do whatever, right? But hey, we're here. We're 3 miles from home on our bikes. What would kids do? Well, kids would do this. It might not be the right thing to do. But it's what we would do. and actually, kind of checking yourself and getting in that headspace is part of the challenge of the game.
Yeah, and since the game was written, they're not expecting people who, like, everybody who plays it to be people like us.
Right, exactly.
There's actually lines in the game that say, like, if they go to the parents and talk to them about it, the parents will just kind of blow them off. I'm very much paraphrasing it, but the parents won't believe it, or they'll get there and it's like be a Phineas and Ferb moment where it'll just all be fine, or they won't see the weird thing because it'll be gone or dismantled or whatever. And basically everything is up to the kids.
Right.
What I do like about it is that it's, the kids might get hurt, like they might break an arm or something like that, but the kids are always, at the end of the day, are always safe.
Right.
As a kid, broken arms happen. A broken leg when you fall off a bike or whatever happens. But kids aren't going to be in real peril in that sense. They're not going to die. They're not going to get kidnapped or any of the other really horrible things that could happen. It's still very much like a Goonies or I haven't seen Stranger Things, but I assume Stranger Things sort of thing. And I'm trying to run it more lighthearted than the episodes that I've seen. Actually, I've only seen one now that I think about it. Episode that I've seen of Tales from the Loop on Amazon, which was, like, in my mind, super brutal to the little girl who's the main character in that one. Right? It's like really so dark. They're very
I made the mistake of watching it at the beginning of the COVID era, and like, I don't know that it was great for my headspace. Yeah. You've got this craziness happening in the world, and then you sit down and, like, thinking Tales from the Loop is going to be what you were describing, and it was what it actually was, which is kind of, wow, this went to some dark places.
Yeah, or like Real Genius with Val Kilmer sort of deal. Right. Like crazy college sort of science weird stuff. Definitely for kids, not college.
Right.
But yeah, I'm glad we've been playing it. It's been a lot of fun. In fact, we'll play it in a few days, I hope.
Yes.
We had to cancel at least once because of life, but life happens.
Yes. So which game would you like to talk about next?
I don't know. I mean, I could talk a little bit more about I don't have. Last time I had them all ready to show, like, if we were.
See, I have them all ready this time. You inspired me.
All right.
Upside down.
All right. So which one is that? Oh, that's Tales from the Loop.
This was Tales from the Loop.
Yep. I have the PDF version, and I had printed it out because I could, but I had not picked up the hardcover. But I really thinking about it because that art is beautiful.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I'm probably going to pick it. They have actually. There's a Tales from the Loop art book.
Yes.
I don't know if all of the art that's in the RPG is also in the art book, but the art book is amazing. One of the other games that I was interested in was, and I don't know, I really want to use it. It's more of a meta, like, layer on top, called, it's from John Wick, not the assassin, the game designer. But it's kind of a little mini game piece that you can actually get as part of a larger bundle of others of his games. But it's called Flux. And the idea behind it, I really just grabbed me, which is, there's, like, your group, maybe your group doesn't like to play anything other than D&D. Or maybe your group is getting a little tired of the game you're doing right now, or you're getting a little tired of running it or whatever. Well, the Flux kind of allows you to keep playing with those same characters, but then switch systems and worlds and everything. The meta behind it is, or the conceit behind it is it doesn't even go into what is doing this or how or why, which can be a whole other thing that you could add to your campaign, which is, like, the world changes. You don't jump through a portal into another dimension. your entire world dimension, you just change. And you're sitting here and, you're playing a D&D game and your character's a wizard, and suddenly everything changes and you're now a mutated rabbit in Gamma World.
Right.
And the way you work it is your D&D character sheet goes into a binder, and then your Gamma World character sheet goes on top of it. And there's rules in it. I won't go into those, but most of the time you will remember that past character. The more you switch, the harder it is for you to remember more of these characters. So you can basically, the Flux allows you to switch these settings. What was cool about it, though, is because you remember those earlier things, you still have access to those earlier character abilities and knowledge, but the universe doesn't like you using them. So that magic user who's now a mutated rabbit, maybe there's a bunch of killer androids coming at you. You can say, I cast Fireball. And you do. And it basically, since the universe doesn't work that way anymore, it goes off to whatever kind of the GM feels is its maximum effect. It's super effective. But then there's a backlash from the universe. Well, it notices, hey, that's a fireball. That's not something that should be here. So for the next couple of games, the universe is going to try and kill you. And so it's just a really interesting concept, especially when you think about, eventually you're like, hey, let's play that D&D game again. And eventually that D&D character goes back on top because it's the same one. And then all the other characters are now underneath it as well. So you can have that. And then you can have a whole meta thing of like trying to investigate as the universe is changing out from under you. What is causing these shifts? Who is causing these shifts? Is this something that can be stopped, or should it be stopped? A whole bunch of other meta questions can start to be asked by your ever changing character to try and get.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool concept. I really like it.
Yep. Why don't you talk about one that you want to play?
Yeah, so I want to, given kind of the times we're living in, I am jonesing to play Star Trek. This is the I always massacre their name.
Mophidius.
Mophidius.
I've only. It's one of those words that you can read, and you always pronounce it right when it's in your head, and then when you say it out loud, you have no idea if it's right or not.
Yes, exactly. And then you meet somebody else and they're like, that's not how you pronounce that. Like, are you sure? You know what? I have no idea how to pronounce it.
Right.
And I'm bad at spelling things, saying things phonetically anyway. So anyway, it is the latest version of a Star Trek role-playing game. My friends and I have kicked around this idea a little bit. I love the idea of like the optimistic nature of Star Trek. I think I would want to run something in like the original series movie time frame or maybe shortly thereafter where you encounter strange things every week, and maybe you're exploring some unknown region. Hexcrawl in space, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
What I like
original series, more episodic than that.
Yes, less like Next Generation, and more original series,
or less like DS9 and Voyager.
Yes. Yeah, like Picard, Picard and Discovery are both. They're heavily episodic in so much as the story is carrying over from episode to episode.
Right. Right.
As opposed to I want more standalone things. And the cool thing about this game, it's fairly simple. It uses their 2D20 mechanic. I'm still getting my head around the mechanic. It's one of those things I keep picking up the book and reading it, and then get carried away by something else. But the thing that I like from a meta standpoint is that you play the bridge crew. But you have alternative characters because it isn't always appropriate for the bridge crew to go beam down to the planet, right?
Right.
So it could be that the equivalent of the Commander Riker is beaming down. Okay, everybody break out your red shirts because obviously we're not sending the whole bridge crew except for, of course, when you send the whole bridge crew except for Scotty.
Right. Right.
In which case, Scotty's red shirt comes and well, we all know what's going to happen to him, right?
Right. Right. And
so I think there's enough. The beautiful thing about Star Trek, especially within my group, is there's enough shared knowledge of Star Trek that we would be able to play with the tropes and and kind of have some of those adventures with. I think it would be very easy for us to slip into this.
Very cool.
So that's. I think it would be a nice little antidote. Be an antidote to some of the crush of news and the world events that we were all living under.
Yeah, more lighthearted. We could have totally played Tales from the Loop much more like the Amazon version of it, but that was just like too dark. I think right now a lot of people are playing role-playing games more for the escapism than you can play role-playing games for a bunch of different reasons. One of which is to explore concepts and like maybe the darker side of human psyche. And I think right now a lot of people are avoiding that because that's what's happening in their life right now. Right. They don't want to get away from that.
Which is why my other pick, I don't know if it's really still my pick, but I bought the book and gosh darn it, I really want to play it. Is the Alien role-playing game, which is pretty much diametrically opposed from everything I just said about Star Trek, in that you are playing characters that are up against the unstoppable killing machine known as the Xenomorphs, right?
Right.
I think this is another one that my group personally would have fun with if we went the Colonial Marines angle. The game kind of assumes there's different ways you can play it. That you can do a campaign mode, and you can also do cinematic. Where cinematic, it kind of assumes the characters are going to die, because if you've seen Alien, or if you haven't seen Alien, spoiler, a lot of people die.
Right.
I could see my friends getting into the Colonial Marine headspace and kind of playing with. I wouldn't necessarily make it a comedic game, but having fun with the Hicks lines, right? Like game over, man, game over, that kind of style play where it's more the roller coaster and less the horror.
Yeah. Like when you mention like Colonial Marines, I'm thinking like a squad based game of like the Starship Troopers movie, where they're fighting bugs and it's very much with the bravado of the beginning of the Aliens movie. You could definitely still go the Aliens route, or you could go with the Starship Troopers route of we're probably going to win all the time. When you were bringing up Aliens and we're talking about it, and I didn't think about it the last time we spoke, but this time I'm like, the way that Aliens could be run, especially like cinematic mode, reminds me of, and having never played it, but you have, is Call of Cthulhu.
Yes.
Where, you have that slow insanity coming, there is doom. You aren't going to win. The best, in a lot of that stuff, those mythos sort of games are ones that probably wouldn't be super keen on right now.
Right.
I have wanted to play, but it's like, King in Yellow, there's this giant sickness sweeping across the world. Yeah, a little too close to home right now. Thanks.
Right, exactly. It's very much a little too much close to home. But, if you're fighting the Xenomorphs and you can blow a few of them up, that might be cathartic in a different way. So.
Right. Yeah, my other one that I ran briefly, I think you were in that. Yeah, you were in that one. It was so much focused on learning the rules that it wasn't as much fun playing wise, and then life got in the way and we just never continued it. But that's Blades in the Dark, which is or same system, same sort of concept, but instead of like magical fantasy, sci-fi, which is Scum and Villainy. And the idea behind that is you're kind of a crew of some sort. In Blades in the Dark, you're kind of a street gang that do jobs, do capers, do heists. That's kind of the base set. What I really like about it from a setting and rule standpoint is that, unlike games that in my past, and your past probably as well, like Shadowrun, it's like, we got to break into this place and steal this, hack into this thing and steal this prototype cyber arm or whatever. You then spend 3 sessions just planning the heist and gathering information and doing all this other stuff. Blades in the Dark, you said you pick an approach. You're gonna go in guns blazing. You're gonna social your way in. You're gonna sneak your way in. I think there's one more, but I can't remember it right now. But you choose one of those approaches, as they're called, and you roll some dice based upon that approach to see how the heist has started. If you roll really well, maybe the heist is going well. If you roll poorly, maybe you're already in a combat with the guards. You have more of a Ocean's 11 or I'm now forgetting it with the Mark Wahlberg and the Mini Coopers.
The Italian Job.
Italian Job. Yes.
Or Leverage, the TV show.
Leverage is really good. I would say, because there's a lot of the social aspect there too. Right. They don't go into the smash and grab stuff as much in Leverage. There are a few episodes of that there, but that is definitely one of the inspirations. But the idea is, especially with Ocean's 11 and Italian Job, you get to certain places and then they'll do a flashback. And Blades in the Dark has a flashback mechanic. So it's like you don't have to plan. When you get to the safe, you say, okay, now I want a flashback for how we break in, like how we know how to get into the safe. Kind of role play a scene, and you roll some dice, and depending upon how that dice rolls out, it's like, all right, you got the tools, you got all the tools, you studied the model of safe that's here, et cetera, and then, well, maybe you didn't do so well on those rolls, and then we flash forward again to the present day, and you're at the safe, you look at the door, and you go, that's not the model safe we prepared. What the heck are we going to do now? And then the game continues on from there. And it's just really cool. And there's several other layers of rule sets for like downtime and burning off heat and increasing your gang. What happens if one of you gets arrested? Well, you can now you can start a gang in prison. Like all that kind of stuff is in Blades in the Dark, and it's just layers on layers of fun. And I'd like to do that. Scum and Villainy is basically a very thin veneer over, you don't have to do almost anything except call it Star Wars.
Right.
to make it into a Star Wars game where you're doing those things as a rebel cell against an evil empire. Now they have their own setting, etc., against it, but they called it Scum and Villainy for a reason. And I would really like to run a Star Wars game on that, using that system as well.
I think that sounds fantastic. I think Blades in the Dark was great. It was a great experience, even though we were learning it, because I love games that, and Tales from the Loop I think does this too, where it stretches your brain in different ways. As gamers, as humans, we have a tendency to fall into certain cadences, especially if you've been playing with the same group for a long time. My group's been together for 24 years, and playing D&D for much of that. And so, it's hard actually to start in the middle. It's hard to give up all of the planning that we as gamers, or not speaking for all gamers, but at least for my group, and I think for many gamers, you're used to, this is how you do things, right? And what do you mean we're skipping to the middle? Yeah. It makes you uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, and so, but then you start using that mechanic, and it's like, yeah, I want to use this more. It's like when I first started playing like the Fate system stuff with Spirit of the Century, and the idea of having aspects for each character that allow the player to do cool things, but also gives the GM a hook to make the game more complicated, not to go against the character, like not to win, but like, it's like, oh, well, the whole thing just got more complicated because your aspect of, stronger than the bull of Hephaestus or something like that just got, that got tagged. And now as a player, oh, I've got another fate point that I can use later, but I might need to use it to get out of the trouble that we just got into, that sort of thing. And it's really cool, being able to do that with things like some of the stuff in Tales from the Loop and Blades in the Dark. And I've totally stolen some of the stuff from Blades in the Dark, like like the clocks. It's just an extended test in some ways, but like a clock, I'll just do this, is just like, you draw a circle on a index card, and then you make it into pie wedges, and then instead of saying, oh, you fail your lockpick roll, it's like, okay, well, you fail it, you get through it, it's not you fail the lockpick roll and didn't open it. You did open it, but now we've got this filled in pie wedge, and the title of this clock is guards alerted.
Right.
And that just sits on the table and is just out there, and the players see those wedges get filled in, and it adds a lot of tension to and it may never get filled up. Right. But it's there and the players see it, and it adds tension. I've totally ripped that off for other games. And it's really pretty cool being able to do that. Especially since so many, like there's a bunch of 5e and other games like that out there have these extended tests and extended ideas. So the concept is there. It just gives it physical or visual form. And so it's not really adding a new rule in that sense, but it adds to the game.
Yeah, and I do love those extended challenges. We're running my weekly game is actually Star Wars right now, and so I'm running it. And so my most recent adventure was running a skill challenge in which they must navigate the unknown regions to reach their destination planet. And I wanted it to be more than just like popping through hyperspace. I wanted them to have to think through the unknown regions are hard to navigate. There are challenges, there are dangers, and unless you're an excellent pilot or you're tuned to the Force or you are the Chiss. Okay. The Chiss, they have Force sensitives that help navigate their ships. Like there's whole backstories as to how you can navigate through this. And so I used Saga Edition has the idea of a skill challenge, which is taken from D&D 4th Edition. And it was great because it wasn't just a straight up win or lose. It was, they're making their way through it. And as they're failing, things are interesting.
Yeah.
So, failure is always interesting. And I think that's been a great lesson to learn from games like this. And it adds to that tension, right? Like one more failure, what's going to happen?
Yep. And that was something that was kind of missing from early games, is the idea that failure makes the game more interesting. A lot of the stuff back when we started podcasting was when story games really started coming out, and the idea that failure is not the end. Failure makes the game more complicated. There is no novel that is successful. I'm sure there's novels out there that are written like this, but there's no novel that is successful, that is popular, where the hero just wins all the time.
Right.
They just waltz right through everything, beats everything, no problem. And, there's always risk. And, even way back Lord of the Rings, Frodo has his crises of conscience, faith, willpower, whatever you want to call it, kind of gives into the ring at the very end and fails right at the very end of the book. And if not for Gollum, then the end of the book would be very different.
Right.
And so failure makes the story more interesting. And that wasn't really there at the beginning of role playing. And I don't fault them that. They were inventing role playing back then.
Right.
But having these tools now just to make things more interesting, allows for things like the skill tests and other things like that, where failure isn't the end of the game, but it's a failure that the heroes in the game have to now overcome and become better heroes for it. You're telling a hero's a group of heroes' journey. I love a lot of those things, and I've always gone through various systems that I have yet to ever play, may never ever play, but it's always fun to see what other designers are creating and then liberally steal from them.
And so speaking of that, as we close out the show, I have my last game, which is not a new one. It's actually one that's been on my shelf for a long time. Harkening back to our earlier conversation of Amber, it is the Amber Diceless role-playing game.
I have yet to play that. I would love to play that at some point.
It's fascinating. First of all, because it is a diceless mechanic, so you're actually comparing stats. Character generation is a bidding process where you have like 3 or 4 different people, and there's a pool, and you're bidding for what your attributes are going to ultimately be. And then during the game, like I'm going to be the best at a thing. You're not going to be so good at a thing. I'm going to automatically beat you. So how can you bring your other attributes into play while you're playing the game? And so I've read through it, and this is one of those games that I would go back and smack younger me. I always thought I'd have the opportunity to run this or play this because, every year I'd go to Gen Con. This was when I was going to Gen Con every year, in like the early 2000s, late 90s. And there'd always be a table. Like you could always play Amber Diceless because
it was really popular back then.
It was really popular. Everybody was playing it. And and now, 20 years later, not so much. So it's fascinating. I have never played a diceless game, and I think this is just it's on my bucket list of, I would love to try a diceless game, and, well, geez, I have this one, so.
Is it a very political game against other players? Like, very player versus player sort of thing? Or is it...
I think it can be a lot of different things, and I think that's the other thing that was intimidating about it at the time, was the people who were really into Amber and very much into making their own suite of cards, the trumps,
the tarot and the trumps,
cards, the tarot from the books, and so it was a little bit of all of the above, right? There should be tension between the players because you are all members of this kind of dysfunctional royal family that can travel through space and time,
right?
Kind of imagine their own worlds, and so there's that, and so you are kind of inherently, because of the nature of the setting, frenemies,
right?
But I think there's usually some larger threat that's pulling you together. It may be another family member, like one of the earlier generation characters from the novel, some threat out of shadow, and so the idea that the combination of those things, the tension of figuring out what your relationships are to one another, which is the part of Spirit of the Century that I always enjoyed, plus this whole universe is our sandbox type thing, plus, hey, let's love her and put in another story. That is the threat that is driving everything. It sounds fascinating.
Right.
It also sounds really hard to pull off well.
Yeah. I definitely would read it if I had a copy, and I've got a friend or two who have played it before and they really love it. But again, I just never got a chance. So
I think it is the sort of game that you have like a social compact. We're going to run 4 sessions of this. And this is the setup, and these are, it's definitely one of those things where you kind of like need the campaign contract coming in. Yes, there's going to be a little bit of PvP. Like, here's the expectations that you set for the campaign. It's not a long-term thing. Here are the guidelines for what we're going to play. Like, where are you comfortable going? That kind of thing. Yeah.
So rather than have it be more like, especially if it's a game group that you've played with for a long time, rather than have the unspoken campaign contract, you definitely need to lay it down and put the boundaries around it so that everybody understands how it's going to be. Like, I could come in and think, oh, this is going to be a very PvP heavy game, and so I'm going to be ready for that. Whereas somebody else might be like, oh, we're going to fight against chaos. Okay, so I'm ready for that. Right. And not even thinking PvP at all. Like having guidelines, those boundaries, those things defined early is probably going to make it a bit better of a game.
Indeed.
So that people aren't playing 2 different games when they're playing the same game.
Yes, because it is. I mean, the books themselves cover a wide variety of like what I would call play styles, right? So,
yes.
I mean, you could PvP would be a perfectly valid interpretation of Amber because that's what the books are.
Yep.
Summoning armies out of shadow to go confront the big bad, that is also a thing. Trying to find your lost plane of reality or lost Avalon, and having that be a heroic quest to try and capture this lost memory. Mm-hmm. You can never have that thing, but maybe you can imagine a new version of it, and the quest that goes, that's also a thing.
Right. Right. Yeah, and so that's 3. So you just described 3 completely separate games, all in Amber. So
yes. So yes, talk, folks.
Yes, we've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes. So, which is about my normal podcast length, but that's with like 5 other hosts. So we should do this again very soon.
Indeed.
But I think we should wrap it up tonight. So
indeed. So there will be contact information in the show notes once we figure out what the podcast is called, where we're hosting it, and where the show notes will be.
Yep.